Houston Texans and the Cincinnati Bengals. This is sitting 6.5 in favor of Cincinnati, a total of 47. I sent you guys a message yesterday that I came in on the under thinking this thing was going to move, and it is not. It is still sitting at 47, despite the fact that we have no T. Higgins in this, and that Jamar Chase is to the point where we have them saying, well, he looked pretty good, and we'll see, we'll see what comes of it. For me, that was a really good sniffing point for me. Like, I started to sniff on this game a little bit more and started to look at things a little bit deeper. And then now we do get official word that Nico Collins, Damian Pierce, Jimmy were all out for the Texans in this thing. So we do have that. Laramie Tunsil questionable. So I do wonder how effective this Texans offense can be as well. 47, pretty high in today's game environment. So that's where I ended up on this one. Steven, what say you?
Beginning of the week, I almost pulled the trigger on Texans north of a touchdown, and I just couldn't do it because of the injury situation. So definitely not interested in Texans south of a touchdown now that we're sitting at 6.5, especially with the wide receiver issues. Did you say Nico Collins is definitely out at this point?
Yeah,
yes, that's a huge blow. I mean, he's got a massive target share for CJ Stroud this year. So hey, start Tank Dell in fantasy lineups, though. I'll tell you that. That guy is fun. But on the Bengals side here, aren't they just going to try and get out of here as healthy as possible and get a win? Like, this isn't a game where they're going to try and be firing on all cylinders. And Rappaport said this morning on Friday morning that T. Higgins is probably not going to play. He's more week to week than he is day to day. It's clear that if Jamar Chase plays, he's going to be, working through some pain with a bruised back. So this feels like a lot of Joe Mixon this week if they can do it. I can't get there on either side with the injury situations, and because of those injuries, I mean, everything you said about the under makes a ton of sense to me, and that's a big number to use. The point Adam made a couple games ago. That's a big number in this day and age in the NFL. Scoring is so down this year. That's a huge number with all the injuries to the weapons on both sides.
And Adam, one thing I didn't point out that I'm glad that Steven kind of brought up there in this is you do have a Cincinnati team that it's not their Super Bowl, because obviously they've made it to the Super Bowl, so it is Super Bowl. But next Thursday they play the Ravens, and that is a much, much more important game in the grand scheme of things with everything. So them being able to get in on this game, get up, just like Steven said, hand the ball to Mixon a million times, get out of there with some sort of gross win seems okay in this situation, considering you do have that game on Thursday and you do have some guys that are kind of nicked up. So another thing that did actually play into the underthought for me as well.
It's not often that I give you guys 180-degree pushback, but I'm going to give it to you on this one. Cincinnati is 5-3. Houston is 4-4. If Houston wins this game, they have the same record, and Houston has the tiebreaker when we get into potential playoff scenarios. I don't think it's just a throwaway for Cincinnati in this spot because Cincinnati still has a very difficult schedule down the stretch. So I don't think they treat it like the Super Bowl by any stretch. And obviously, keeping T. Higgins out of this game, they're not. And they might lean that way with Jamar Chase. I'm going to stay out of this game entirely. I understand the look to the under. It's going to be hard for me, though, the way that both CJ Stroud and Joe Burrow have been playing, to feel comfortable playing under no matter who the receivers are. So I'll stay out, but I would just say I think there's a little more value in this game for Cincinnati than a throwaway.
I will say this, and this is another thing that I would throw out there with this one. I wouldn't necessarily take a look at this and then just assume, because and the numbers aren't up quite yet, and so when they do get up, but I wouldn't assume that this is just like, oh, well, this is going to be Tyler Boyd going nuts or whatever. Tyler Boyd's number is going to be incredibly inflated, and we have seen many times, like we've seen T. Higgins out, we've seen Jamar Chase out, we've seen different scenarios where like Burrow just doesn't hone in on Boyd. Boyd is like he is a really great number 3. And they love him as a number 3, and Burrow just looks at him as a number 3. And so I'm guessing this number is going to be tempting for a lot of people, but I don't think it's a slam dunk that like, oh, just because T. Higgins is out and maybe there's fewer snaps to go around for Jamar Chase, that it's going to be smash spot there for Tyler Boyd, because you can just look over the last couple of years. Joe Burrow just doesn't increase his targets to him a ton, right? He just doesn't.
We
if you
haven't
want to go
talked
somewhere
enough.
else with that.
Sorry, go ahead, Adam. Yeah.
If you want to go somewhere else with that, then go look at Irv Smith. Go look at Andre Iosivas. Iosivas is actually the guy behind T. Higgins on the depth chart in his spot. So you could probably find some less ridiculous numbers on some of those secondary receivers than you will on Tyler Boyd.
The other thing we haven't talked enough about with the Bengals, as much as we've been high on them, their defense is still a concern. They're giving up a ton of yardage every single week, it seems. Now, they're getting away with it with turnovers, but over the last 3 weeks, they are 31st in the NFL at 6.4 yards per play allowed. So Lou Anarumo is great at second half adjustments. We've seen that over the years, but moving forward, especially next week when we talk about that huge game across our podcasts, I think we need to start looking at this Bengals defense a little closely before we consider them as a true Super Bowl contender.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my only pushback to that would be it's Seahawks, Niners, Bills like the last 3 weeks. So, I mean, it's certainly not teams that don't have a pulse, and they still won all 3 of the games. So,
and guys, to that point, I think we need to talk about a greater point overall in the NFL, just a greater environment thing, is that we probably this year in particular need to reevaluate what we think about yardage allowed and red zone efficiency, because we've seen a lot of change in the NFL this year where everything is kept in front of you, right? And that's not a new thing to this year, but there is a lot of bend but don't break defense in the NFL with as many teams as play over the top shells. Teams are being allowed to move the ball down the field and pick up yardage, but they're not being allowed to get into the end zone at the same level that they used to be. And so there are smarter numbers behind this that I'm not referencing here because I didn't look it up and think about it in the moment, but I have read quite a bit about that this year.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Like people are surrendering the underneath stuff. Like they are okay with the underneath stuff, and then they clamp down once you kind of get to like the 40-yard line, and that's when they really start to play a little bit different form of defense. That is definitely a good point to bring up.